Welcome to our How to Bet podcast. Daryl Fine and Sean Miller with you, and our special guest, Haley Shapley. And Haley, it's great to have you with us, author of Strong Like Her, and a local University Penn grad. And Haley, it is great to have you along with us. And I know we at times step away from our usual betting talk, and it's great to have you on and tell folks a little bit about what you're up to.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on. As you mentioned, I am the author of Strong Like Her, a celebration of rule breakers, history makers, and unstoppable athletes, which is a book that looks at how we've viewed physically strong women throughout various eras of history, from ancient times all the way through today. I also am a freelance journalist who's been working on a project with HowToBet.com to chronicle the gender gap in sports pay.
So when we talk gender gap in sports pay, I know that's what we're talking about a little bit here today, and you can find the article at HowToBet.com. The gender gap in sports pay is one that gets discussed often, especially with the latest success in women's sports, the USA women's soccer team. Of course, you have the fabulous Williams sisters, tennis, the WNBA has grown in attendance. But there are naysayers. I mean, let's say, and I myself, all in favor. Let's say you are a pilot for American Airlines. You're male, you're female. You start at the same time. You have the same hours of flight time. Of course, in my opinion, and I would be silly for anybody to disagree with this, you should get paid the same whether you're male or a woman. However, when you head to the sports business, the people out there will say, well, look, men's sports generates X amount of dollars, which is way more than what the female sports generate. So what are we looking for? Are we looking for equal pay, or are we looking for a closer gap?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. But I think, you're right that the argument typically is about revenue. That seems to make sense to us. It seems fair. It's about dollars and cents. But I think with the U.S. women's national soccer team, we see that they have actually generated more revenue than their counterparts on the men's side over the past few years. And yet they're still fighting for equitable pay. There's been some movement on that case recently, but they've been kind of locked in a battle with U.S. soccer. And yet the #1 selling jersey on Nike.com is the women's home team jersey. So women are capable of generating revenue in sports. They've shown that they can, and yet they're still fighting for kind of just this equal respect and value when it comes to salary.
Hey, Haley, it's, with soccer, and that's going to be my forte. As a big Manchester United fan, I don't like to admit that after this weekend, but whatever. I know, like, with the men's team, these guys, it's weird because the men's soccer, obviously these players get paid by U.S. soccer. But like all the men's players, they don't really care because, Christian Pulisic is making $150,000 a week playing for Chelsea. And Winston McKennie's playing for Juventus. So like they come into the system and they just get paid. And, it's weird because like for the U.S. women's players, I know there's like the NWSL, but that's really funded by U.S. Soccer. So this is their main source of income. How do you? I'm just trying to figure out like how do we fix the issue here to make sure, because I know it's been debated and I know it's it's been in Congress and all this stuff. Like how do we go about fixing this so it's a little more equitable?
Right. Well, I think it starts with investing in women's sports, and we're headed in that direction. We see women's sports have been just really growing in popularity in recent years, particularly with the soccer team, but also the WNBA, in hockey, in all kinds of sports, and just fitness in general. But I think that's that's why we see this gap. When you think about the NBA, it was founded in 1956, 1946, whereas the WNBA was founded in 1996. So that gave men a 50-year head start in playing professionally. It's also worth noting that women didn't even play a regular 5-on-5 game until the 1970s, whereas men were playing that from the beginning when basketball was invented in the 1890s. So we have this gap in people playing, learning to play, in girls growing up and recognizing that they could actually be professional athletes. That's just kind of starting to begin now. So I think what women's U.S. soccer players and others have been arguing is that if you invest from the beginning, if you give the same access to medical treatment, to coaching, to playing surfaces, to marketing dollars, that you will reap the rewards from that in audience and in revenue generating opportunities. But it takes that initial investment to see that come to fruition.
I think, as we do a betting show here, obviously, I just once again go back to European football. And, most of the sites are backed by betting companies. Have the stuff on the jerseys and stuff. It's a little bit different here in America. What do you think, could these betting, the explosion of betting companies all over the country in these different states, and do you think maybe that could be, putting some revenue into it, backing these teams and maybe helping to equal out? Because, at the end of the day, it comes down to, the money and investment in dollars and cents, like you said. Is that something like, or maybe from these other companies, is that something that you need to see more investment from these companies?
Absolutely. I think that could be one piece of the puzzle. And we've seen a real uptick this year in interest in women's sports leagues and teams partnering with betting organizations. And the research shows that there is an interest in betting on women's sports, but the lack of media coverage is a real hindrance to that because people need to know who they're betting on. But in June, the WNBA's Phoenix Mercury announced a partnership with Bally's. And on a league-wide level, in August, the WNBA Players Association and a gamification company called the Gaming Society announced a partnership called Bet on Women. That's really aimed at increasing visibility of the league, maximizing that fan engagement, and trying to draw a new audience to the sport. WNBA players are pretty adamant that once people see them play, once they attend a game, that they will become a fan. So it's really just about getting that exposure and that visibility. And I think as we see more of these partnerships, and there's also been a recent one in golf, the LPGA has a new betting partnership with BetMGM Sportsbook. The WTA in tennis recently partnered with FanDuel Sportsbook as its authorized gaming operator. So more of these partnerships are starting to happen. And I think it's also worth noting that women who are interested in betting is growing as well, which could have a correlation with maybe people being more interested in women's sports. So about a third of bettors in the US are women, and that's largely fueled by millennials and Gen Z. So I think that we'll continue to see this interest growing. And I think there's a lot with technology and gamification and making it more social. So having fantasy leagues, I see this as an area for sure to kind of infuse some money into women's sports.
So people, trust me, people will bet on two ants racing down the sidewalk. That won't be an issue. If there's lines up there, people will bet on it. The biggest problem with that is, to just throw a little curve into this, is that the vast majority of money in the United States is bet on professional football. We're not going to see that in a women's game. So that will hinder the betting aspect for women. But as far as betting on the WNBA, if there's lines out there, people will bet on it. If people know there's lines out there, they'll bet on it. That's just, there's a lot of people that just hunger to bet all the time. So I do see that being a clear possibility. Let me talk tennis with you for a moment. When you go to, and I've been to the U.S. Open many a time out in Flushing Meadows, to me, the women's bracket, honestly, I've found just as exciting, if not more so, than the men. However, when I'm there, I do notice, a little different attendance as far as the men's go. I think the men still attended more, even though to me, for years now, the women's game has been, as far as competitive and exciting, I found it just as exciting, if not more. How different is the gap there between a Djokovic and a Williams, let's say?
Yeah, tennis has the smallest gap of all the sports that I looked at in terms of the gap in pay. And a lot of that is thanks to work done in the 1970s with Billie Jean King and some of her comrades who kind of banded together and said, we're not going to play for so much less than what the men are making. They kind of took a risk and played for, a different tournament, and that ended up becoming what is the WTA today. So all of the majors in tennis have equal prize money at the top for men and women now, although there is still about a 34% overall gap for the average pro male and female tennis players. But it is the smallest gap. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I was just reading that one of the women's competitions was more highly watched recently than the men's. So I think that people have seen that the women's game is just as exciting, and that's because they've been on equal footing for a lot longer time, or closer to equal footing. That's why today we see that this pay gap just isn't as big as it is in other sports.
Well, we do appreciate you coming on. And before we let you go, Haley, promote. What do you have out there to promote? I know we've mentioned some of it, but go again so everybody here on HowToBet.com can get and read what you have written.
Well, I absolutely recommend checking out the article on HowToBet.com, which just shows you some data, highlights what those pay gap differences are. And again, my book is Strong Like Her, looks at fitness and how we have viewed muscularity in women over time. Some of the trailblazers along the way, like we've mentioned, Billie Jean King and others who have made it possible for women to even play sports today.
Well, we thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. Keep up the good work and keep fighting the fight. Thanks again to Haley Shapley, again, the author of Strong Like Her. We appreciate her coming on. Get to HowToBet.com to read that article. And hey, again, thanks for coming aboard HowToBet.com. We'll be back after this.